The silence was the first thing, not the gentle quiet of rustling leaves or distant bird calls. This was a profound, suffocating absence of sound. It pressed in on my eardrums. It felt like a physical weight. I was deep within the ancient, sprawling heart of Blackwood National Park. It was 1995. The sun, usually a benevolent presence, felt oddly muted. Its light struggled to penetrate the dense canopy of ancient pines. A faint, earthy tang hung in the air. It was mixed with something else, something acrid and unsettling, like ozone after a lightning strike, or something far, far older. A scent that clung to the back of my throat, tasting of forgotten things and deep, primal fear. It was the smell of something disturbed, something that had been dormant for millennia, now slowly, inexorably stirring. This wasn't merely the quiet of nature, it was a preternatural stillness, a vacuum that seemed to actively absorb all ambient noise. The very air felt thick, heavy with unspoken dread. It was a tangible presence. I, Ranger Elias Thorne, had spent a decade in these woods. I knew every trail, every hidden spring, every animal track. The wilderness was my sanctuary, my life. I understood its predators, bears, wolves, the unforgiving cold of winter. I respected them. I knew how to survive them. My knowledge was born of years of observation, of quiet patience, of an almost instinctual connection to the land. I could read the forest like a book, every broken twig, every disturbed patch of moss, a sentence in its complex narrative. I could tell the age of a tree by its bark. I could predict a storm by the shift in the wind. But as that unnatural silence settled, a cold dread began to coil in my gut, a premonition that defied all my years of rational experience, all my seasoned instincts. It was a feeling that screamed wrong. It was a dissonant chord in the otherwise harmonious symphony of the wild, a note of pure, unadulterated terror. I was about to learn that some truths are not found on maps, some dangers are not listed in wildlife guides. I was about to learn that the wilderness wasn't just a place of beauty and challenge, it was a place where things waited, not for prey, but for a moment, for a weakness, for a breach. And one of them, something ancient and hungry, had finally stirred from its slumber. Its awakening was the silence itself. A silence that was not empty, but pregnant with unseen menace. A profound, malevolent presence. My life was the park. From the moment I could walk, the scent of pine and damp earth felt more natural than city air. My earliest memories were of hiking trails with my grandfather. He taught me the names of trees, how to track deer by their prints. The call of an owl was my lullaby. He instilled in me a deep reverence for the wild, a belief in its inherent balance and predictability. He taught me to listen, not just with my ears, but with my whole being, to the subtle rhythms of nature, to the whispered secrets of the wind through the pines. I'd started as a seasonal aide, then worked my way up to full-time ranger. It was a dream job, a calling. My uniform, forest green and perpetually dusted with pine needles, felt like a second skin. It was a badge of honor, a symbol of my dedication. My patrol truck, a beat-up Ford F-150, was my office, my companion, my only true connection to the outside world for days at a time. Its familiar rumble was a comforting presence against the vast quiet. I preferred the predictable vastness of the forest, the quiet solitude, over the chaotic unpredictability of human interaction. The forest was honest, humans were not. The trees didn't lie. The animals didn't scheme, they simply were. My current patrol was routine, a week-long circuit of the park's most remote sectors, checking trail markers, clearing fallen logs, looking for signs of illegal logging or poaching. I carried my standard gear, a well-worn backpack, a reliable compass, a two-way radio, and a .30-06 rifle for bear protection. Every item was chosen for its dependability. Every piece had a purpose. The weather forecast had been clear, the trails well-maintained. Everything pointed to a peaceful, uneventful journey. A simple, solitary week, a chance to recharge, to reconnect with the primal rhythms of the earth, to shed the lingering anxieties of the outside world. I didn't believe in ghosts. Not in the traditional sense. I believed in rational explanations, in the cold, hard logic of ecology, in the undeniable cycles of nature. Blackwood National Park, with its towering peaks, pristine lakes, and ancient whispering forests, felt less like a place of dread. It felt more like a grand, living cathedral, a testament to untamed beauty, a place of quiet reflection, a sanctuary for the soul. Its towering trees were silent sentinels. Its clear streams veins of life. Its hidden caves were merely geological formations. I was utterly, terrifyingly wrong. The cathedral had a crypt, and something was stirring within it, something that defied all my understanding, something that had no place in any scientific textbook. As the days wore on, the subtle shifts began. They were so gradual at first, so easily dismissed. I almost convinced myself I was imagining them, a product of my own isolation, or the lingering effects of too much strong coffee, perhaps the early onset of a cold. My compass, usually a steadfast needle pointing true north, a beacon of unwavering reliability, would occasionally twitch, a nervous tremor, then settle back, as if fighting an unseen force. A subtle magnetic tug that defied its internal mechanics. It wasn't a wild spin, not a full malfunction, just a slight, unnerving tremor, a silent question mark. A fleeting moment of defiance against the laws of physics. I'd tap it, shake it, try to recalibrate it, but the anomaly would persist, a tiny nagging doubt, a persistent whisper of wrongness in the back of my mind. I'd dismiss it as a minor magnetic anomaly, common in certain wilderness regions, a quirk of the Earth's magnetic field, nothing to worry about, nothing that couldn't be explained by science. A comforting lie, I told myself, a mantra against the creeping unease, a desperate attempt to cling to the familiar. The wildlife, typically a comforting presence, a vibrant tapestry of life, began to behave strangely. Deer would freeze mid-graze, staring into the deepest shadows, their eyes wide with an unnatural terror. Not the fear of a hunter or a wolf or even a sudden wildfire, but a primal, instinctual dread that seemed to emanate from the very air. Their bodies rigid, their muscles trembling, they would stand frozen for minutes, then bolt, not in a specific direction, but seemingly at random, crashing through the undergrowth as if pursued by an invisible predator. Bears, usually wary, territorial, and predictable in their movements, would flee at my approach, not with their usual lumbering retreat, but with a frantic, desperate scramble, their fur bristling, their guttural growls replaced by whimpers. They would leave behind half-eaten berries and fresh kills, abandoning their food source in a desperate flight, as if something far more terrifying than a human was pursuing them, something they couldn't fight. Something that instilled a fear deeper than any physical threat, a fear that transcended their animal instincts. The birds, usually a constant chorus, a vibrant symphony of chirps and calls, grew eerily silent for long stretches. Their absence was more unsettling than any noise. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting, watching, its ancient unseen eyes fixed on something I couldn't yet perceive, something that commanded the very creatures of the wild, something that silenced them with its mere presence. Then came the sounds, or rather the absence of some sounds. The forest, usually alive with chirps, rustles, and distant animal calls, would sometimes fall into an absolute unnatural silence, a vacuum that seemed to swallow every sound, every whisper, every breath. It left a ringing emptiness in my ears. This pressed in on my eardrums. It was a painful pressure. It felt as if the very air itself was being sucked away, leaving me breathless, disoriented. My own footsteps, once a confident crunch on pine needles, felt strangely heavy, almost sluggish, as if pushing against an unseen current, a thick, viscous resistance. My hushed narrations into my handheld tape recorder seemed to lose their echo. They were swallowed by the suffocating quiet, dying almost immediately after leaving my lips. This left me feeling isolated, adrift in a sea of dread, even from my own voice, as if the very act of speaking was futile, a pointless defiance against an overwhelming silence. I'd hear faint, almost imperceptible creaks from trees I'd just passed, sounds that seemed to follow me, always just behind my line of sight, a branch rubbing against bark but no wind to cause it, or the soft drip, drip, drip of water that wasn't there when I investigated. This sound seemed to come from inside the earth itself. It was a phantom leak, a constant, maddening rhythm that tapped against my nerves, a cruel, mocking metronome counting down to something terrible. A faint, cloying scent like damp earth mixed with something metallic and sickly sweet would drift past. Then it would vanish as quickly as it came. This left me sniffing the air, confused. It was a taste of something foul on my tongue, something unnatural, something that defied explanation. It was a scent that hinted at decay far deeper than mere rot, a decay of the soul, a spiritual corruption. I found myself whispering even when there was no need. My voice was barely audible. It was as if afraid to disturb something that was listening, something that had been waiting patiently for me. It waited for my fear to ripen, for the perfect moment to reveal itself, to claim me, to absorb me into its ancient, silent hunger. It was a hunter, and I was its prey. One evening, I set up camp near an ancient, gnarled oak, a landmark on my map, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers reaching towards the sky in a silent plea. Its bark was a roadmap of centuries, deeply furrowed, scarred by time and unseen forces. The air grew impossibly heavy, thick with that cloying scent now stronger, almost suffocating. The hum, which had been a subtle background presence, a low thrum in my bones, intensified. It vibrated through the very ground beneath my sleeping bag, up through my body, rattling my teeth, shaking my entire being with an internal tremor, making my very cells resonate with its alien frequency. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force, a pressure that squeezed my chest, making it hard to breathe, stealing the air from my lungs, leaving me gasping, desperate for oxygen, a silent internal scream, a constant, agonizing vibration that threatened to tear me apart from the inside. The trees around my campsite began to ripple subtly, not with wind, but with an internal tremor, as if their very roots were convulsing, as if something vast and ancient was stirring beneath the forest floor. A profound disquiet radiated outwards, disturbing the very earth. The leaves on the branches began to glow faintly, not with phosphorescence, but with a cold, internal light, like submerged lightning, illuminating fleeting, impossible shapes within the dense foliage, shapes that defied botanical classification, forms that seemed to shift and writhe, just beyond the edge of perception, a dance of impossible shadows, a silent, grotesque ballet. The very air around me seemed to thicken, to become viscous, making movement difficult, as if I was pushing through an unseen jelly. The temperature dropped sharply, not a natural drop, but a sudden, biting cold. It seemed to emanate from the very ground. It pierced through my thickest layers of clothing. Then the darkness hit. Not the gradual descent of night, but something else. The sky, moments before filled with twilight hues, ripped open, not with thunder and lightning, but with an impossible, instantaneous blackness. It was as if a vast, unseen hand had simply extinguished the stars, plunging the world into a blackness so profound it felt like a physical presence, pressing down on my camp, on me, a suffocating blanket of non-light, a literal absence of existence. The wind shrieked, a sound that was less like air rushing, more like 1,000 tormented voices screaming in unison, tearing at the branches, whipping the leaves into a frantic, chaotic frenzy, a cacophony of unseen agony, a symphony of despair, the cries of the lost, echoing from an impossible distance, yet somehow right beside me. My radio, my lifeline shrieked, a deafening white noise that drowned out all thought, a piercing screech that tore at my eardrums. Then it died completely, leaving a terrifying, absolute silence. It was worse than the noise, a void of sound, a perfect, terrifying emptiness. My flashlight beam, usually a steady beacon, flickered wildly, casting grotesque, dancing shadows. They seemed to writhe on the trees. They mimicked grotesque figures. I was blind, deaf, and utterly adrift in a maelstrom of impossible physics, a pocket of chaos ripped from the fabric of reality, a place where the laws of nature simply ceased to exist, replaced by something ancient and malevolent, something that defied all human understanding, something that warped the very fabric of existence. Through the chaos, through the spray of invisible particles and the roaring wind, I saw it. I saw it, not a solid object, not a creature, but a distortion. The trees, the ground, the very air seemed to tear open, revealing a gaping void. It wasn't black. Black is merely the absence of light. This was an absence of everything, a profound nothingness. It seemed to drink the very photons from the air, leaving behind an inky, consuming darkness, a literal hole in existence, a portal to oblivion, a gateway to a realm beyond human comprehension. It shimmered with an impossible, profound cold, a paradox that defied all understanding, twisting the very light around it, bending the photons, creating a swirling vortex of warped reality. A maelstrom of non-existence, a black hole in the fabric of the cosmos, a wound in the universe itself, bleeding into my world. From within this void, the hum intensified to a deafening roar, a physical pressure that threatened to crush my skull, to implode my very being, to reduce me to a screaming, formless mass of terror. And then I felt it, a presence, not a physical touch, but a psychic intrusion, a cold, probing tendril reaching into my mind, bypassing my defenses, burrowing deep into my consciousness, touching the raw nerves of my very soul, exploring my deepest fears, my most cherished memories. It was ancient, immense, and utterly malevolent. It wasn't trying to kill me quickly. It was trying to understand me, to absorb me, to make me part of its endless, silent scream, to add my consciousness to its terrifying chorus. It was the wilderness itself, a living, hungry entity, a cosmic predator, a force that had shaped the very mountains and carved the valleys. Now it sought to shape me, to remake me in its own image, to make me a part of its eternal, agonizing existence. The psychic intrusion intensified. It became a torrent of alien thoughts and fragmented images. They flooded my mind, overwhelming my senses. I saw glimpses of impossible geometries, structures that defied Euclidean space, vast, swirling constructs of light and shadow. They existed in a realm beyond human perception. I felt the collective agony of countless lost hikers, vanished campers, their fear, their despair, their final moments of comprehension as they were consumed, all compressed into a single, overwhelming wave of suffering that threatened to drown me. I saw glimpses of distorted human forms, suspended in an eternal, silent maelstrom within the void. Their ghostly figures slowly dissolving, their consciousnesses slowly being assimilated, their identities erased, becoming part of the hum, their individual screams adding to the collective torment. Their faces, contorted in silent agony, flickered in and out of my vision, their eyes wide and pleading, yet utterly devoid of hope. I felt the entity's hunger, a vast, insatiable emptiness. It sought to consume all light, all life, all existence, to expand its own being through the absorption of others. It was a primal, terrifying hunger. It resonated with a dark, ancient power, a force that had existed since before the universe, before time. It showed me its collection, not as objects, but as echoes, as fragments of consciousness, suspended within its vast internal landscape, each a tiny screaming note in its endless symphony, and I felt the terrifying pull to surrender, to let go, to become one with the endless quiet, to join the collective, to find peace in oblivion. A seductive, horrifying siren song. It promised an end to the torment, an end to the fear, an end to Elias Thorne, a final, blissful nothingness. I don't know how long I was trapped in that maelstrom. Minutes, hours, days, time lost all meaning, dissolving into the chaos, becoming another victim of the void's temporal distortions. My mind screamed for answers, for logic, for any shred of sanity. But there were no answers, only the terrifying, consuming void. Its presence was a crushing weight on my soul, a suffocating blanket of despair. I pressed myself against the damp earth, my body battered by unseen forces, bruised and aching, my muscles screaming in protest, threatening to tear themselves from my bones. I fought with every ounce of strength, not against the storm, but against the insidious pull of the void, against the psychic intrusion that sought to unravel my very being, to strip away my identity, to reduce me to a raw, screaming nerve, a mere echo in its vastness. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The void snapped shut, like a monstrous eye closing, leaving behind only the lingering chill. The impossible darkness vanished. The wind died to a whisper. The trees stood still. The sun, impossibly, was high in the sky, shining down on a calm, quiet forest, as if nothing had happened, as if the nightmare had been a mere hallucination, a figment of my tortured mind, a cruel trick of the light. My camp was still intact. My tent stood. My gear was scattered but present. I was alive. But something had fundamentally changed. A piece of my sanity, a piece of my soul, had been left behind in that void, a sacrifice to its hunger, a price paid for forbidden knowledge, and a piece of the void I would soon learn had followed me out. A parasitic attachment, a chilling souvenir, a permanent stain on my existence, a fragment of its endless hunger now residing within me, a constant, gnawing presence. My rescue was a blur. Days later, a search party found me. I was slumped against a tree, hypothermic, delirious. My eyes were wide and fixed. I was repeating fragmented phrases about the hum and the void. My voice was hoarse and broken, barely a whisper. The rangers looked at me with a mixture of pity and unease. Their faces reflected the unspoken questions in their minds. The park investigation was thorough but fruitless. They found no evidence of a storm of that magnitude, no logical explanation for my state. I gave them a sanitized version, a sudden severe bear encounter, equipment failure, a bout of extreme hypothermia, anything to avoid the truth, anything to make it sound plausible, to fit within the confines of their understanding. Who would believe the truth? They chalked it up to trauma, the psychological toll of a near-death experience, a convenient label for the incomprehensible, a way to dismiss what they couldn't understand, to file it away and forget. I was discharged from the hospital, physically recovered, but mentally a shattered man, a shell of my former self, haunted by what I had seen and felt, forever marked. The doctors prescribed sedatives, therapy, rest. They told me I would recover. They were wrong. I returned to my small cabin on the edge of the park, a place that once felt like a sanctuary, now a cage. The initial relief of survival quickly curdled into a profound gnawing unease. The hum, that pervasive bone-deep vibration, had followed me. It was faint at first, easily dismissed as the cabin's old timbers settling, or distant wind, a trick of the mind. But it was always there, a low thrum that resonated in my teeth, a constant reminder of the void, a persistent whisper in the background of my life, a constant low-level torment that gnawed at my sanity. Then came the cold spots, unnatural pockets of biting chill. They would appear in specific areas of my cabin, even when the wood stove was roaring, making the hairs on my arms stand on end, raising goosebumps on my skin. A cold that felt alien and alive. They moved, shifting from the corner of the living room to the foot of my bed, from the kitchen to the bathroom, a mobile pocket of unnatural cold that defied all logic, all thermodynamics. I'd wrap myself in blankets, but the cold was internal, a profound chill that seemed to emanate from within me, from the very core of my being. A cold that no external warmth could dispel, a cold that seeped into my soul, freezing the marrow in my bones. My senses began to distort. Water, no matter how hot from the tap, always felt slightly too cold, like the frigid depths of the void. A chilling reminder of its embrace, a constant phantom chill on my skin. Sounds seemed muffled, as if I was perpetually underwater, a constant pressure on my eardrums, a dull ache behind my eyes, a sense of being submerged even on dry land. Colors in my cabin, once vibrant, now appeared muted, faded, as if a thin gray veil had been drawn over reality, dulling the world, draining its life, stripping it of its joy and vibrancy. Electronics malfunctioned when I was near them. Lights would flicker erratically, my old radio would burst into static, my phone would lose signal in my own home, even when fully charged, as if my presence, or the presence of whatever had latched onto me, was actively interfering with the fabric of reality, disrupting the very flow of energy, a constant reminder of its power, its disruptive influence. Small objects would shift, inexplicably. Keys moved from the hook to the table. Books would fall from shelves when no one was near. Doors, which I swore I'd closed, would be slightly ajar. A silent, mocking gesture. A subtle violation of my personal space. A constant reminder that I was not alone. It was subtle, easily dismissed as forgetfulness. But the sheer consistency of it began to chip away at my sanity. A slow, methodical erosion of my grip on reality, leaving me teetering on the brink of madness, questioning every perception. The presence became more defined. It wasn't a physical form, but a feeling of being watched, constantly, relentlessly, from every shadow, from every corner of my vision. I'd catch peripheral glimpses of shimmering air, like heat haze, but cold, twisting just beyond my line of sight, a fleeting distortion, a glimpse of the impossible. a hint of something vast and incomprehensible. Shadows in my cabin would move unnaturally, elongating, twisting into impossible shapes when I wasn't looking directly at them, dancing at the edges of my vision, mocking my attempts to ignore them, to rationalize them away. The auditory anomalies escalated. Not direct speech, but sounds that implied communication or mimicry. I'd hear distorted echoes of my own voice, phrases I'd just thought, twisted and drawn out, a chilling mockery, a violation of my inner thoughts, a perverse echo of my own mind. Phantom creaks of unseen branches, the groan of stressed timber, the sounds of deep earth churning, all emanating from the walls of my cabin, from the very floorboards beneath my feet, from the empty air itself. It was the wilderness manifesting itself, piece by agonizing piece, in my home, recreating its horrors within my sanctuary, turning my safe haven into a new, smaller prison, a microcosm of the void. I tried to fight it. I installed cameras, hoping to capture proof, to show someone, anyone, what was happening. But the footage was always corrupted, a blur of static and impossible distortions, or simply blank during the most active periods, as if the entity actively erased its own presence from the recording, defying capture, defying documentation. I tried to document the cold spots with thermometers, but they would drop only when I wasn't looking, or the readings would fluctuate wildly, defying logic, defying the laws of physics, mocking my scientific instruments, rendering them useless. I sought help, therapists, psychiatrists. They listened patiently, prescribed sedatives, diagnosed me with severe PTSD, paranoia, and delusions. They told me it was the trauma of the wilderness, that my mind was struggling to cope, that I was simply hallucinating, that it was all in my head, a convenient dismissal of the impossible. I knew they were wrong. I was not just traumatized, I was infected. The entity's nature slowly became clearer, not through understanding, but through horrifying experience. It wasn't a ghost, a spirit of the dead. It wasn't an animal, a creature of the forest. It was something else, something ancient and non-corporeal, a distortion of reality itself, a fragment of the wilderness's true essence that had latched onto me, a parasitic connection. It wasn't trying to kill me quickly. It was trying to absorb me, to drag me back into its reality, to make me part of itself, to consume my consciousness, my memories, my very identity, adding my essence to its endless hum, to its terrifying chorus of lost souls. It fed on my fear, on my deteriorating sanity, growing stronger with every moment of terror, every sleepless night, every chilling whisper, every flicker of my sanity, every shred of my former self that slipped away. It was a slow, agonizing consumption, a living death. A prolonged torment that promised no end, only a final, complete assimilation. The climax came one night. The hum became deafening. My cabin felt like the inside of a collapsing cave, battered by unseen forces, its timbers groaning. The air shimmered with that impossible cold. The walls seemed to breathe, distorting inwards, bending and twisting as if they were made of rubber, their very structure unraveling, dissolving into the pervasive chill. The whispers were no longer indistinct. They were a chorus of tormented voices, pressing in, trying to break through the last vestiges of my mind, a cacophony of agony, a symphony of despair, a chorus of the damned. The floor beneath me began to heave, mimicking the impossible tremors of the forest, threatening to throw me off my feet, to swallow me whole, to drag me down into its depths, into the waiting void. My furniture groaned, twisting as if trying to reconfigure itself into gnarled roots, its wood groaning and cracking, its metal shrieking, a perverse recreation of the forest's embrace. The void, that absence of everything, began to form in the center of my living room, a swirling vortex of profound darkness, pulling at the light, pulling at the air, pulling at me. It wanted me back. It wanted to complete the absorption. It wanted to claim its prize, the piece of itself it had left behind, the piece of me it now craved, the final agonizing step in its consumption. I fought back with a desperation born of pure terror. I screamed, not in fear, but in defiance, a raw, guttural sound that tore my throat, a desperate cry against the encroaching darkness, against the impossible, against the very laws of existence. I grabbed anything I could, throwing objects at the shimmering void. Futile gestures against an incorporeal enemy, against a force that defied all physical laws, that mocked my very existence, that rendered all my efforts meaningless. I knew I couldn't escape it. I could only learn to live with it, or fight it constantly, until it finally won. I had to sever the connection, or at least weaken it. I focused on every memory of solid ground, of sunlight, of the world outside the park. I clung to the feeling of warmth, of life, of individuality, of sanity. To every anchor I had to reality, every shred of my former self, every precious memory that defined me, every moment of joy and connection. I pushed back against the cold, against the hum, against the whispers, with every fiber of my being, with every ounce of my will, with every desperate beat of my heart. It was a battle for my soul, for my very existence, a fight to remain myself, to hold on to the last fragments of who I was, to deny the void its final victory, to remain human, to remain Elias Thorne, even if only a shadow of him. I survived that night, barely. The void receded, the hum faded to its usual background thrum, the cold spots retreated to their corners. But I am forever changed. I am a survivor, yes, but also a prisoner. The something is still with me, a constant chilling companion. It is a piece of the wilderness, forever tethered to my existence. I live with the hum, the cold spots, the flickering lights, the muffled sounds. I am a living testament to the wilderness's true nature, a walking anomaly. I am living proof that some disappearances are not just vanishings, they are absorptions. And sometimes the abyss stares back, and sometimes it follows you home. I was a forest ranger in a national park in 1995, and the wilderness wasn't the only predator, and it's still here, and it's still hungry, and it's waiting. It waits for the moment my guard drops, for the moment my sanity finally gives way, for the moment I finally surrender. And I know with a chilling certainty that settles deep in my bones that it will come. It will come for me again. And next time I might not be strong enough to fight it off. Next time I might just become another whisper in its endless hum, another lost soul in its terrifying collection, another piece of the wilderness. The forest calls to me in my dreams, a vast dark expanse, filled with the hum, filled with the lost. And I know one day I will answer. The pull is growing stronger, I can feel it. A subtle tug at the edges of my consciousness, a whisper that promises an end to the torment. A final terrifying peace. I can feel the damp earth on my face, even in my sleep, and the vibration of the ground beneath my feet. I see the endless, inky blackness of the void, and I hear the chorus of the consumed, their voices growing clearer, more distinct, beckoning me. I am a ticking clock, counting down to my own inevitable disappearance. The wilderness will have its due.